Jesus' love for his disciples and the people he encountered always came from this exceptional gift of Jesus to give his love as freely as he felt God's love had been given to him. And it may seem naive to think we have the capacity to love without conditions, without expectations for love in return. But if Jesus is our model, as Karl Barth once said, Jesus, and I quote, "Jesus is the name of our species, and we are subhuman in relation. But nonetheless, we are called to become that." Another interesting aspect of Jesus' love for another was the incredible ability he had to meet people in their individual and particular circumstances. Jesus loved people not because they had achieved a particular status in life, but because he saw through the clothing, saw through the station in life in which they were living, the wealth or the lack thereof, the gender or the age or occupation, to the uniqueness of each and every individual, and saw there the beauty of diversity. And so we too have the capacity to love each person we encounter with the knowledge that this too is a child of God. John Claypool, who David and I had seen in the first opportunity that we had to go to the Festival of Homiletics, which we'll be going to again in May, but this was when we were still in the Chicago area. John Claypool got up to preach, and he talked about the gift of life. So wonderfully warm and influential Episcopal priest, and deeply loved by those who knew and heard him. He tells a story, and it's of a little boy who's trying to learn the Lord's Prayer. And so at night he kneels at his bedside, and the little boy says, "Our Father who art in heaven, how do you know my name?" About this story, Claypool says, "Such individualized affection will always remain a mystery to us mortals. And at the same time, let us never forget we're made in the image of that extraordinary love. And doing what Jesus did in loving each one he ever met as if there were none other than that person, no one else in the world, is at least an ideal toward which we can reach, even if it always remains utterly beyond our complete grasp." But not only did Jesus seem to love each person that he met with an individual affection, but he also expressed a collective concern for groups of people, particular groups of people. If we think back to the Sermon on the Mount or the Beatitudes, we hear that. We hear him talking about those who mourn, that they might be comforted. And he spoke for those who were stricken with poverty so that they might have hope for their future. He blessed those who hunger and thirst for justice and righteousness. And he welcomed the little children and told us to remember that being in the kingdom of God means to be as awake as the little ones to this amazing world in which we live. St. Augustine said that Jesus loved all as he loved each. Jesus never looked on a group of people with disdain, but always with eyes wide open to the inner beauty of each person and of the knowledge that even in groups, these are children of the living God. Loving one another is not simply feeling good about someone. It also means radically doing something that shows the degree of love we have for one another. To love in the Christian sense has been misunderstood more than any other theological doctrine of the Christian faith. Often love has meant that we accept some doctrines, even those that carry an unbalanced power system. For example, it was recently reported that fraud occurs more frequently in churches than any other place. Because as Christians, we are taught to blindly trust the leaders of the church. Raising our voices or questioning leadership is seen as unfaithful. Love in church thus often means not to question, not to speak up, not to challenge, but to accommodate the prevailing status quo. So Jesus' commandment to love one another is not about blindly following how others interpret the Bible or understand the Christian faith, but to always use our minds to determine if this behavior is an act of compassion, an act of love, or is it an act of power over. One minister put it this way: the most fundamental problem with the notion of love is expressed in certain Christian efforts to promote love rather than justice. Love without justice tends to become a cover-up for the power of the status quo. In patriarchal societies, women are supposed to love their husbands without ever challenging them, even if they are clearly wrong. In mainline churches, those who disagree and who see the need for challenging the institution are supposed to mute their dissent in the name of love. Worse yet, love itself can be an expression of power as it seeks to share others in our own image. So the question is can we redeem this word love? The love Jesus seems to be pointing to in his commandments to the disciples was based in a later statement that he made to the disciples in the 15th chapter of this same gospel, when he said, "No one has greater love than this, but to lay down one's life for one's friends." Meaning this kind of love he was talking about was the ability to love in the form of standing in solidarity with those for whom he would have done so in a like manner. We talked about that a bit in our adult Bible study this morning, about the need to stand in solidarity with those who are suffering. In this matter, compassion or love for one another moves from being a mere feeling, but also moves us into the realm of doing justice. That is the power of love. But what does the power of love then look like? There's another story about a young boy that I had heard years ago, but I want to share with you. It was a story of, he had found out that he had come down with cancer, and his parents were taking him to chemotherapy treatments. He was, I believe, a third grader. And as he continued to get treatments and it was weak, his hair fell out. But he got strong enough that he could return back to school, and when he did, the other children in the classroom saw his pained expression and that he was worried about how he would look to the other children. And so after that first day of school, his classmates decided to meet to see what they could do to help him feel more comfortable in the classroom. The next day, as each of his classmates came in, each one, even the girls, had shaved their heads. The teacher was so moved by this outpouring of standing in solidarity with this one child that was suffering, came back the next day and took her scarf off, and she had shaved her head too. That's what the power of love looks like. Standing in solidarity with one another